Our story starts in a cruel world of underground fights. It is a place where men show no mercy, and the only language that everyone understands is the language of violence and pain. A mysterious man volunteers to fight a famous champion named Carter Ford. As soon as the man takes off his hoodie and shows his face, Carter instantly becomes scared and refuses to fight. The man's name is Dalton, and he is known as one of the best fighters in the business. When one of the local mobsters wants to rob him and stabs him with a knife, he recognizes Dalton and prefers to flee the scene. A woman named Frankie becomes a witness to this scene, approaches Dalton, and offers her help. Dalton takes the knife out of his body and wants to fix the injury with duct tape. Frankie owns a bar and suffers from attacks by local criminals. She asks Dalton to help save her business by working as a bouncer at her bar for 1 month. She promises to pay him $20,000, but Dalton rejects her generous proposal. Right now, he is going through a difficult period in his life and suffering from suicidal thoughts. When he fails in his attempt to kill himself, he thinks that it is a sign and decides to call Frankie and accept her offer. Her bar is located in the Florida Keys. There, Dalton meets Charlie and Steven, charismatic workers at a small local bookshop, and they give him a warm welcome and explain how to find Roadhouse. Dalton finds the bar, looks around, and meets the bar's employees, Laura and Billy. He likes the place, but the first impression proves to be misleading. At night, the bar turns into complete chaos full of bullies, boozers, and mobsters. The biggest threat to the place is a gang of bikers and their leader, Del. They show up at the bar and start acting like real jerks, threatening the bar's guests and employees. Dalton makes Del and his goons go outside for a talk. A crowd of people gathers around them to watch the show. Dalton plays it cool and keeps mocking Del, making him even angrier than before. Dalton starts the battle and shows himself as an extremely skillful fighter. He graciously defeats Del and his guys one by one. When none of his opponents can even stand up, Dalton ends the battle as the winner, amazing everyone. Although the bikers are bad guys, Dalton wants to help them and takes them to the hospital. There he meets Ellie, a beautiful doctor who quickly falls under Dalton's charms. Frankie thanks Dalton for his help and allows him to stay in her old houseboat. Dalton recalls his past when he was a famous UFC fighter before his life turned upside down. In the morning, Laura brings him breakfast and tells him that he is a good man who can help make Roadhouse a safer place. Dalton visits Charlie, and she gives him another book to read. He needs to use her computer, but the local bullies show up near the bookshop, so he protects the girl and scares them away. Meanwhile, the mob boss Ben Brandt, also known as Mr. B, finds out about the bikers' shameful defeat. He wants to know more about the new bouncer at Roadhouse and intends to destroy the place to the ground. At the bar, Dalton gives Billy a couple of useful pieces of advice on how to deal with local bullies and gives him a real masterclass, successfully calming the drunk guest down. Dalton inspires Billy and tells him that one day he might make a great bouncer himself. Together, they make Roadhouse a better place where its guests can finally feel more or less safe. Dalton keeps having nightmares about his UFC past, but life in Florida is worth it. One day he meets Ellie again and she warns him to be careful with the local gangs. When Dalton returns to his houseboat late at night, someone hits him with a car. As Dalton tries to stand up, the car attacks him again. Before Dalton falls from the bridge, he can hear Del's voice. Although Dalton falls into the water, he survives. When he returns to the houseboat, Del tries to kill Dalton with a gun, but Dalton protects himself and fights with Del. As a result, Del falls into the water and gets attacked by a crocodile. Dalton tries to save him, but it is already too late, and Del dies. Dalton realizes that the mobsters desperately need Roadhouse, but why? Is the reason connected to drug trafficking? One of Ben's goons finds Dalton and wants to take him to Ben for a talk. Dalton refuses to go with him and breaks the guy's fingers so he can't even hold his gun anymore. At the same time, a weird naked man named Knox receives a phone call. During the conversation, Knox attacks a man and takes his clothes away, causing chaos around him. Knox receives a task to come to Florida, and he is already on his way. Dalton and Ellie go on a fun boat trip and have a pretty romantic date in the middle of nowhere. Ellie admits that she knows about his past from the internet, but she doesn't care. She kisses Dalton and he reciprocates. Knox arrives in the Florida Keys and tells Ben that he has a message for him from his father. Ben isn't managing his duties well, so Knox is tasked with helping him get rid of Dalton. After his date with Ellie, Dalton is apprehended by the police. The officers beat him up, and their leader, who is also Ellie's dad, threatens to kill him. Thankfully, Ellie rescues Dalton and drives him away. Ellie believes that her dad works for Ben Brandt, whose business is connected to drug trafficking. The mobsters decide to target Dalton's weak spot and ambush Steven's bookshop. At the bar, Dalton finally meets Ben in person. Ben tries to manipulate Dalton by revealing his darkest secret. During his last UFC fight, Dalton killed his opponent, who was also his friend. When Dalton doesn't react, Ben sends Knox to resolve the issue using his own methods. With other bikers, Knox enters the bar and starts destroying everything around him. He violently beats up everyone who gets in his way and provokes a serious fight between all the bar's guests. Chaos and destruction ensue, so Dalton has to intervene and stop Knox. As Dalton approaches him, Knox threatens to smash him and turns their battle into a really impressive performance. They are both strong, quick, and skilled fighters, making it hard to predict who will win. Dalton and Knox fight like two wild animals, constantly moving around the bar and fiercely punching each other. Of course, Knox uses his dirty methods to trap Dalton and beat him up, but Dalton's friends come to the rescue and help Dalton free himself. Dalton and Knox continue their battle outside the bar, but suddenly Dalton silently walks away. He returns to the houseboat, packs his belongings, and prepares to leave. Frankie begs him to stay and help her save her business from Ben Brandt, but Dalton doesn't listen. He changes his mind only when he sees the bookshop burned to the ground and finds out that Charlie and Steven are in the hospital. He was afraid of losing control and killing someone. Now, he is no longer afraid. After he kills one of the mobsters, Dalton goes after Ben Brandt. He also deduces Ben's criminal scheme and attacks one of his corrupt cops, retrieving a suitcase full of money. The sheriff finds Dalton and tells him that Ben Brandt kidnapped Ellie and wants his money back. Of course, it's a trap, and Dalton feels it, but he decides to play along. He goes to Ben, who reveals that he really kidnapped Ellie and demands his money. All of a sudden, Knox decides to join the fun, and Dalton gets back into action. First, he blows up the boat he arrived on. After the explosion, Dalton defeats Ben's goons and frees Ellie, who escapes from the boat. While Dalton fights the mobsters, Ben captures Ellie again. Dalton confronts Knox, and they have another one-on-one fight. Although they are both skilled warriors, Dalton gains control over Knox's boat. Ben tries to attack and kill Dalton but fails, and Dalton gets on his boat. Ellie ambushes Ben and distracts him, and Dalton helps her defeat him. Dalton and Ellie jump into the water just in time before the boat crashes into the bridge. Knox survives and steals someone's car. Ben is also alive and tries to kill Dalton one last time. Dalton fights back and beats Ben up. Knox shows up and engages in a fight with Dalton. They keep hitting, beating, and punching each other, and their battle intensifies. Each of them uses any possible means to hurt their opponent and make them give up. Finally, Dalton manages to set a trap for Knox and holds him as tightly as he can, but Knox frees himself and prepares to kill Dalton. Knox stabs Dalton with a knife, but then Ben approaches them, and Knox decides to kill him. As Knox returns to finish Dalton, Dalton fights back and stabs Knox in response. Dalton repeatedly stabs Knox and kills him. When Ellie sees Dalton, her father tells him to leave and promises to cover Dalton's backside. After what happened, everything slowly returns to normal. Dalton wants to leave the town forever. He leaves the suitcase with money to Steven and Charlie and boards a Greyhound bus, unaware of what awaits him in the future.